So welcome back everyone. Welcome back to the Max Jancar show. In this episode, we're gonna talk about dumper's remorse. We're gonna talk about the stages and the psychology of dumper's remorse and generally just the theory around it. Now, what is dumper's remorse? Well, at its simplest, it's a residue of love. It's an emotion your ex feels when they break up with you, but then a little bit later, be that a week, a month later, or maybe even years later, they regret their decision. They regret breaking up with you. And while your ex feeling this way, these emotions that arise in them, sure, they increase your chances of getting back together with them. It doesn't guarantee, like the remorse itself, doesn't guarantee that that will happen. And I know that's important for most of you because most of my listeners do want to rekindle things with their ex. Now, another important aspect of dumper's remorse is that it doesn't entail the same characteristics of a typical emotion. So, okay, what does this mean? Unlike, for example, anger or sadness, it doesn't present itself just instantly. Instead, it kind of slithers into one's conscious awareness very subtly and very gradually, aka in stages. And while these stages, call them the stages of dumper's remorse for a lack of a better term, they don't unfold in the same way for every situation because, every breakup is different, every person is different. But that being said, they do follow a predictable pattern that I kept repeatedly seeing when working with customers, with clients, and generally just conversing with my readers and listeners. Now, in this episode, I'll basically present this pattern to you, describe each stage of dumper's remorse, and also answer some very pressing questions about the topic. But first, consider the psychology. Like I said in the beginning, that's gonna be our starting point because it's gonna help you understand basically everything there is to know about this supposed emotion, and therefore you'll be way more equipped, way more able to avoid unnecessary mistakes that could sabotage your chances of getting your ex back. So let's get right into the psychology. So the first thing you want to note is that if your ex dumped you, you should understand that you're likely on two completely different sides of the interest spectrum. Their interest is at an all-time low, and yours is probably at an all-time high. In other words, you want them back and they don't want to be anywhere near you. Now, sure, if they feel any ounce of dumper's remorse, they may move up this interest scale, right? Toward your side, toward interest. But until that happens, you should give them what they, probably want, which is space, which is time and space away from you. Because, look, the worst mistake you can make during any of these stages of the dumper's remorse is not giving your ex space, aka you chase after them, you blow up their phone, you call them all the time. Like, these things will only turn your ex off, they will annoy them. So avoid these sorts of behaviors basically at all costs. They will only worsen your situation and, even worse, make your ex maybe even resentful towards you, bitter, hostile, angry, pissed off, and then you will have basically way less chances of rekindling your relationship. Another very interesting argument for avoiding chasing-like behaviors is because they communicate low value. Basically, you communicate through doing them that you have nothing better going on in your life except for focusing on getting your ex back And that's just something a person who has very much low value, low sexual market value, some people even call it, that's basically a behavior that is tied to such a person. And the truth is, as weird as this sounds, rarely anyone wants to date people like that. Like, no one really wants to date people whose whole life revolves around their relationship and their partner, even though it does maybe sound, at least mildly interesting or mildly pleasing, right? But that's just one of the many arguments against chasing-like behaviors. Do what you want with it. I'm not necessarily sure, even myself, whether I agree or disagree with it, but it is out there. It is very popular. A lot of people have some really great thoughts around it. Another important argument in this respect is that if you chase your ex all the time, they may even start thinking things like, hey, I'm thrilled about dating all these wonderful people, but look, I can also have my ex at the same time, and that's great. I can have my cake and eat it too. And you kind of don't want your ex to go through this thought process, because it's only going to lead to them losing respect for you. And when their respect depletes completely, they will never reach the final stage of a dumper's remorse, and instead they will get over you, at which point getting them back becomes almost impossible. So if these aren't good enough reasons to leave your ex alone, consider this one, this last one. Your ex probably left you because you kept desperately chasing over them. Now, I know I'm making a glaring generalization here, but this is unfortunately the case for like 70 or 80% of my listeners and my readers of my blog, maxjancar.com, roughly speaking. So my question to those people is, how will more of the same shit, more of the same behaviors lead to a different outcome? Spoiler, it won't. No matter in which stage of dumper's remorse your ex is in, please give them space, go no contact if you must. Let them feel their emotions without unnecessary and irritating interferences. Let them start missing you and regret their decision on their own terms. Basically, what I'm saying is, let them come back at their own pace. Don't rush the process. So that's the psychology. That's why you shouldn't also chase after them. Here were some, mistakes that you can make while you're trying to get your ex to go through all of these stages of the dumper's remorse, so you can eventually rekindle things. Now let's actually go into the stages. So this is probably going to suck, right? That's the first thing you want to keep in mind. These stages, your ex going through them, it often lasts a couple of weeks, maybe even months, sometimes, rarely, but it does happen, even years. And of course, the time frame of these stages, it varies from person to person, and odds are your ex, on average, like an average ex, they might need months before they actually start to miss you enough to the point where they reach out, to the point where they give you the green light for setting a date, to the point where you can actually initiate the reattraction process. Just something to keep in mind. But anyhow, here's what you can expect in each stage of dumper's remorse. Stage number 1 is certainty. So at first, your ex is going to be, as the name implies, they're going to be certain about their decision to dump you, and they will feel little to no regret or remorse about it. Now, this certainty is caused and hardened by many different factors, but for the most part, the most influential one are relationship length, relationship type, the number of post-breakup mistakes you've made, and your level of maturity. Now, let me actually go through these one by one so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm trying to say here. So when it comes to relationship length, this one is kind of self-explanatory. So, was your relationship serious and long, or was it just a fling, maybe even just a situationship? The idea here is that it's easier to feel little to no dumper's remorse and a lot of certainty about your decision to break up when you dump someone you've been with for like 3 weeks, then if you compare that to being with someone for like 10 plus years and maybe even having a house together, marrying the other person and stuff like that. Now, as for relationship type, what I mean is, was your relationship burdened with abuse, manipulation, lies, cheating? Like, was it a toxic relationship? Or was it healthy? Was it full of honesty and trust and respect? An example here would be, it's just really easier to feel little to no dumper's remorse and a lot of certainty about your decision when you dump someone who fucked your best friend and lied about it than when you dump someone who simply wanted a bit too much attention occasionally. Now, as for post-breakup mistakes, this is another factor that influences your ex's initial level or just general level of remorse. What I mean here is that, well, did you make a lot of them? For example, it's way easier to feel little to no dumper's remorse and a lot of certainty about your decision when you dump someone if that someone kept chasing and begging the other person to come back, whereas it's probably going to lead to way more remorse and way less certainty about your decision to leave or to break up when it comes to someone who accidentally liked one of your Instagram photos from like 2015 or something. So what I'm saying is, big mistakes equal less dumper's remorse and more certainty about the decision to break up. Little mistakes equal more dumper's remorse and less certainty about the decision to break up. Anyhow, moving to maturity level, right? Here's what I mean by maturity level. Are you an independent, self-sufficient, psychologically resilient, and emotionally healthy person who has an actual life outside their relationships, so friends, hobbies, goals, some ambition? Or are you someone of the opposite character? The thing is that it's way easier to feel little to no dumper's remorse and yet again feel a lot of certainty about the decision to break up when you dump someone who was a slacker, a lowlife, a schmuck, someone who has basically nothing going for them and is a failure at life, then, someone who's the opposite. It's much more difficult to feel a little dumper's remorse and a lot of certainty about breaking up when you break up with someone who was a go-getter, someone who is ambitious, someone who's confident, who is healthy emotionally, right? I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I will leave it at that, and I will go now onwards to the second stage of dumper's remorse, the relief stage. Now, regardless of what happened in your relationship, the primary motivation for your ex leaving it is probably because they were too stressed, they were too unhappy about it. They were too stressed and unhappy with you. Therefore, it's only natural for them to feel relieved now that they're out of that relationship. In fact, they often feel so relieved that they become completely unrecognizable. A very, for example, tranquil, saint-like ex could randomly become the biggest slut in town, hopping from one sweaty orgy to the next. A very devious, provocative, sinner-like ex could randomly decide to double down on a life of some higher purpose and let go of the whole fuckboy lifestyle or the slut lifestyle, whatever your gender is, and just mature into this more well-rounded, stable individual. Like, generally speaking, the more outlandish and unexpected behaviors your ex picks up, the more they are probably relieved that they broke up with you. Hence, the less dumper's remorse they feel. And to be fair, it's not like your ex necessarily wanted to break up. They just felt probably like they needed to. So please don't take it personally. This is especially the case if they were unavoidant, to who independence, freedom, and space away from intimacy is just really, really important, and who feel that closeness and intimacy is something to be avoided. But that's a story for another time. That's it for stage 2. Now let's move on to stage 3, the elation stage. So basically, after relief comes elation, or another way to call it would be this free at last feeling. Your ex is happy, and they feel like they can do whatever the fuck they want, whenever they want, without any consequences with whoever they want. And if you've been a controlling and obsessive partner, they may feel even more elation than usual and consequently engage in even more new experiences, sexual, intimate, or not. Like, for example, your ex may go to very strange venues that they've never shown interest for before. They may date people from social groups and subcultures radically different from their own. They may experiment with new clothing styles and haircuts, maybe provocative ones, in fact. They may try very unusual hobbies you've never heard of, and the list goes on and on and on. There are a lot of similarities in your ex's behaviors in the elation and the relief stage of dumper's remorse. Some experts even consider both of these one stage, and all of these behaviors really point to one very simple thing, and that is rediscovery. Your ex is basically, during these stages, essentially trying to find themselves again. So, what can you do about it? Well, for one, don't interfere, but more importantly, be as realistic as possible during this stage and don't take your ex's behaviors too seriously. They don't necessarily mean they're having a blast, nor do they mean they are still suffering. More often than not, the truth is buried somewhere in the middle. Your ex may feel at peace, while simultaneously still foster some degree of dumper's remorse and other lovey-dovey feelings for you. Now, after your ex's elation comes comparison. Now, during the comparison stage, which, yes, is the next stage, as the name implies, they will start comparing you with their dates and their flings and their fuck buddies, making them behave in various ways that might convey interest, or that usually, in fact, convey interest. For example, they may start checking your social media activity. They may start blocking and unblocking you. They may start thinking just more about you in general. They may start going to places you went together as a couple and try to remember and try to maybe reminisce all the good times you shared. Partly to reminisce and partly to also grieve, because that's just one of the behaviors very characteristic for the process of letting go. Now, the reason your ex starts displaying these sorts of behaviors, it's usually because they are getting curious. That is, for the most part, that's the reason. And here's the key. If you give them plenty of space to grow even more curious, they might eventually become more realistic even about your relationship. They'll figure out where they went wrong, where of course you went wrong, and slowly they will start losing some of their anger and resentment for you, which not all exes foster after a breakup, but some still do. It's worth pointing out. So, for example, they could think, my ex really did become too insecure when I was away, but he also, let's say, worked on those issues with a therapist a lot, and I am really proud of him for that. I shouldn't resent him so much for it. Or maybe your ex starts to think something like, hey, my ex did tend to be really too anal about things regarding having his apartment spotless. Maybe he was just a very tidy, organized person and I wasn't. He was very, very focused on those aspects and sometimes annoying about them as well, but at the same time, he was really understanding and compassionate when I left our apartment in chaos, so I shouldn't really be mad at him or at her or whatever. These are just some of the realizations your ex can eventually cook up when you give them the space to actually feel the depth of their dumper's remorse. And then we get slowly into the fifth stage of this remorse, which is the nostalgia stage. So here's the theory behind it. After your ex wallowed in heartwarming memories, after they've compared you with all the people they're going out with and dating, and maybe after they've concluded that you weren't as bad of a partner as they initially thought, they will begin to feel nostalgic. And as a result, they'll start focusing way less on the negative aspects of your relationship and way more on the positive. Think of it as a mild version of the pink glasses syndrome. And then nostalgia will even take the lead by making them feel even more connected to you. After all, nostalgia is defined as this emotion that unifies and connects us, which is also very helpful when it comes to reattraction. Now, to be fair, the rate at which your ex feels nostalgic varies. They usually begin to feel it late in the dumper's remorse process. I mean, this is stage 5, right? And even then, that nostalgia only ensues in short spurts. But, yet again, here's the catch. And this probably won't be a surprise to most of you. If you gave your ex enough space, those spurts will eventually grow more persistent. And if you give them even more space and more time to let them feel whatever they're trying to feel, to let them have the experiences necessary to eventually start to miss you again and everything, they will go into the final stage of dumper's remorse, the regret stage. Now, during this stage, a sense of remorse and regret will start to basically take over your ex's mind. So from here on out, it's only a matter of time before they build up enough of it to communicate their newly realized or newly found interest. At first, they may also begin, by the way, to react to like social media posts, or maybe they watch one of your Instagram stories, but later they may actually like shoot you an unexpected text message, or they may even call you. Like, this is usually how the progression goes. Some exes, of course, just stay in the indirect contacts. Some exes go to direct contacts. It really depends on the person. But talking of indirect and direct contact, if your ex does reach out, they probably won't just directly say, hey, let's get back together, or I still love you, or can I see you this week? Because that's terrifying. So please don't expect these sorts of reach outs. They very rarely happen. Because look, right now your ex doesn't know if you're angry or disappointed with them, and they just don't want to risk rejection or embarrassment. Your ex's attempts to reconnect will, because of these reasons, way more likely be nuanced and indirect. They may, for example, come out and text you something like, hey, this movie reminded me of you, or the time we did XYZ, or they will text you or ask, maybe through a phone call, how's it going? I figured I would call you, right? Or they would say something like, hey, do you remember the name of that restaurant that we ate together for our first date? It was so great and so magical and blah, blah, blah. I would like to revisit it. These are the sorts of contacts you should expect from your ex when they're nearing this, or when they're in this final stage of dumper's remorse. Now, in cases like these, you really have to get good at reading between the lines. Your ex, when they initiate contact like I just described, they're basically giving you excuses. They're simply looking for a reason to reach out without saying anything that's too emotionally difficult. And a bit immature, sure, but that's fine. Don't hold a grudge because of it. Just be sure, if you want your ex back, that you invite them on a date once they reach out. You want to make the transition from texting and calling to actually meeting up as quickly, but still as naturally, as possible, because this is what will increase your chances of getting back together with your ex the most. This is gonna be basically this transition from digital to physical. It's gonna be your best bang for your buck in terms of reattraction. So that's it for the stages of Dumper's Remorse. The final thing I want to leave you with is just a simple idea, and that is that whether your ex feels so much Dumper's Remorse that you manage to get back together, or they feel so little of it that you never hear from them again, please note that things will get better. You will get better. You will find happiness. You will regain your sense of self. You will be confident again. You don't need your ex to achieve any of that. So I really suggest try to take this getting an ex back thing as a win-win pursuit, as a win-win scenario. Whether you get them back or not, you will get better. You probably will find new love again, probably a better person, more compatible person, in fact, because, let's be honest, a breakup is a sign of incompatibility, fundamentally speaking, and things will get better for you. So that's the thought I want to leave you with. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to go deeper into my process to getting back with an ex, if you want to learn how to essentially maximize your reunion odds in a way that's honest, that's ethical, that respects your and your ex's dignity, that's also a very simple approach to the whole thing, yet a very powerful one, you should download my reattraction cheat sheet. It reveals this approach. It answers a bunch of questions regarding getting an ex back. It's a very valuable one-page, easy to digest resource. You can get it on maxjancar.com/x. That's maxjancar.com/x, as in EX. And with that out of the way, that's pretty much it. Thanks again for tuning in, and take care.